Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
We're really hip.
Ninja Turtles. They're heroes in the half shell. And they're green. Ninja Turtles. Heroes in a half shell. Turtle power.
Listen up, because in 1987, 4 pizza-loving, sewer-dwelling reptiles did something that seemed absolutely impossible. They made billions of dollars by completely selling out their own story. But here's the thing. That decision to go full commercial, it's the exact same reason the franchise eventually crashed and burned. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. If you grew up in the late 80s or early 90s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The cartoon, the action figures, the movies. This wasn't just a show. It was a cultural phenomenon that absolutely dominated childhood. But have you ever wondered why the 1987 cartoon looked nothing like the original comic? Or why the show that made billions eventually fizzled out into obscurity by 1996? Well, in this video, I'm going to break down the entire rise and fall of the original TMNT series. How a gritty, violent to indie comic got transformed into the most merchandisable franchise of the 90s. Why that strategy made them insanely successful. And exactly how that same strategy guaranteed their downfall. Because what happened to the Turtles isn't just about cartoons. It's a masterclass in what happens when you let the product catalog write your story instead of the other way around. The origin, the comic nobody was supposed to see. Alright, so let's rewind to 1984. Ronald Reagan's in office, MTV is still playing music videos, and 2 guys named Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird are sitting around drawing comics in black and white. Now, here's what most people don't know. The original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic was dark. I'm not talking Saturday morning cartoon with a lesson at the end dark. I'm talking Frank Miller, gritty, noir-style violence, where the Turtles would straight up kill people. Yeah, you heard that right. Leonardo wasn't cracking jokes and eating pizza. He was using those katanas for their actual purpose. The whole thing was basically a parody of the super serious comics that were popular at the time, especially Daredevil. It was satirical, it was violent, and it was absolutely not for kids. The comic had this whole aesthetic. Black and white art, complex storylines, moral ambiguity. Shredder wasn't some bumbling villain who got foiled every week. He was a legitimate threat. A focused, lethal Ninja Clan leader who you actually believed could take these guys out. And here's the kicker. This thing was only supposed to appeal to a tiny niche audience. Comic book nerds. Adults who appreciated the satire. That's it. But the comic started gaining a cult following. And that's when the business side of things got interesting. In 1987, Playmates Toys came knocking, and they had one very specific condition. We'll make your action figures, but only if you make a cartoon to promote them. Think about what that means. Playmates didn't want to make toys based on a cartoon. They wanted to make a cartoon based on toys that didn't even exist yet. The whole thing was backwards from the jump. This was the era of deregulation in children's television. The FCC had loosened restrictions, and suddenly you could make what was essentially a 22-minute commercial for your toy line. He-Man did it. Transformers did it. And it was incredibly profitable. And Eastman and Laird, they said yes. Because look, they were indie comic creators. Someone's offering you a licensing deal that could actually pay the bills. You take it. But there was a problem. You can't sell action figures to kids based on a comic where the heroes murder people. Something had to change. And that something was everything. The transformation. Selling out or selling smart. So here's where things get interesting. And this is where the rise really begins. To make the cartoon work for a toy line, they had to completely gut the original concept. And I mean completely. They took everything that made the comic unique and tossed it out the window. First, the tone. Gone was the dark, violent, morally complex world. In came bright colors, catchphrases, and comedy. Lots and lots of comedy. The show was produced by Fred Wolf Films, and writer David Wise was brought in to make it more suitable for children and families. That's corporate speak for strip out anything that might scare a 5-year-old. Shredder went from a deadly ninja master to what critics called a goofy and comically inept supervillain who teamed up with a talking brain from Dimension X named Krang. And get this, Shredder could never actually win. Because if Shredder won, if he actually posed a real threat, kids might get scared. And scared kids don't beg their parents for toys. Then there's Bebop and Rocksteady, two henchmen created just to be comic relief and sell more action figures. They weren't in the original comic. They were invented for the toy line. Same with Krang. April O'Neil got completely redesigned too. Yellow jumpsuit, every single time. Why? Because it's instantly recognizable on a toy package. She also became a TV news reporter and spent a lot of time being the damsel in distress who needed rescuing. Oh, and Michelangelo's weapon? In the UK, they literally had to change his nunchucks to a grappling hook because British censors thought nunchucks were too violent. They even changed the name of the show to Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles because the word ninja was considered too aggressive. This is how far they went to make this thing marketable. But here's the thing, and I need you to understand this. It worked. The 1987 cartoon became the most successful animated show on television. The four turtles had distinct personalities that were easy to market. Leonardo, the courageous leader, Donatello, the tech genius, Raphael, the fierce fighter, and Michelangelo, the fun-loving party dude. Every kid could pick their favorite. Every kid wanted all four action figures. The merchandising exploded. We're talking $175 million in 1988, then $350 million in 1989. By May 1990, they hit $650 million in domestic retail sales alone. Between 1988 and 1992, they sold an estimated $1.1 billion worth of turtle toys, making them the third best-selling toy figures of all time at that point. And by 1994, $6 billion in total merchandise sales. This wasn't just a cartoon. This was a money printing machine. The peak, Turtle Mania, and the poison pill. So let's talk about what it was like at the peak of Turtle Mania, because if you were there, you know. Between 1988 and 1992, you couldn't escape the Turtles. They were on lunchboxes, bed sheets, cereal boxes, video games, everything. The 1990 live-action movie, with Jim Henson's Creature Shop doing the costumes, became a massive box office hit. And Playmates toys? They were in overdrive. In 1990 alone, the peak year, they released 13 new basic figures, plus multiple subsets. Disguised turtles, giant turtles, wacky action figures. They had vehicles like the Technodrome and the Mutant module. Every few months, there was something new to buy, and the cartoon had to keep up. But here's where the cracks start to show, and this is the beginning of the fall. See, the cartoon wasn't being written by storytellers anymore. It was being written by the Playmates product catalog. Every time Playmates designed a new action figure, whether it was Fugitoid, Mondo Gecko, or some random mutant nobody asked for, the cartoon writers were required to feature that character in an episode. It didn't matter if it made sense for the story. It didn't matter if it was interesting. The toy had to be on screen so kids would want to buy it. And this is where the show started to lose its soul. Instead of focusing on the core conflict, Turtles versus Shredder, the show became a parade of Mutant of the Week episodes. Random characters would show up, get their 22 minutes of screen time, and then disappear forever. The plots became what critics called perfunctory and riddled with plot holes. Writers would introduce elaborate vehicles without even explaining how the turtles got them into the sewer, because it didn't matter. The point wasn't the story. The point was showing the toy. And because the toys had to keep selling, Shredder and the turtles could never actually hurt each other. Every fight scene was just the turtles dodging lasers and cracking jokes. There were no stakes, no tension, no reason to care. The show had what you might call structural pathology, the very thing that made it successful. The merchandising mandate was creating narrative debt that would eventually have to be paid. By season 4, the show had gone stale. Viewers could feel it. The magic was fading. The competition and the desperate pivot. So, by the mid-90s, the Turtles had a serious problem. The toy sales were slipping. The ratings were dropping. And worst of all, the competition had arrived. In 1992, Batman the Animated Series launched, and it completely changed the game. Here was a kid's cartoon that was dark, serialized, and sophisticated. It showed everyone that you didn't have to dumb things down. You could have real stakes, real character development, and still sell toys. Then, X-Men the Animated Series did the same thing. Complex storylines, ongoing character arcs, real dramatic tension. But the biggest threat of all showed up in 1993 Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Power Rangers had everything the Turtles used to have. Action, teamwork, cool vehicles, martial arts. But it was fresh. It was live action. And the toys were way more fun to play with. Zords that combined into Megazords? That's a whole different level of playability compared to static turtle figures. The Turtles were getting left behind. So in 1994, the show made a desperate move. Seasons 8, 9, and 10, known to fans as the Red Sky seasons, tried to reinvent the entire series. They darkened the tone. They made the Turtles more serious. They dropped most of the comedy. They even changed the official genre listing from comedy to drama. Bebop and Rocksteady suddenly became utterly devoid of humor. The whole vibe shifted. It was trying to be more gritty, edgy, and serious to compete with Batman and X-Men. They even included clips from the 1990 live-action movie in the new season intros. Like, see? We can be dark and gritty too. They replaced Shredder and Krang with a new villain, Lord Dreg, to try to raise the stakes. The problem? You can't spend 7 years building a brand on one identity and then suddenly flip the script. The loyal fans who loved the goofy, lighthearted Turtles felt betrayed. And the new audience watching Batman and X-Men? They didn't care about the Turtles trying to be something they weren't. The show ended in 1996 after 193 episodes. No fanfare, no big finale. It just stopped. One article described it as fizzling out due to declining popularity. Nobody even noticed it was gone. And then, in a final desperate attempt to stay relevant, they launched Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation in 1997. A live-action series that blatantly copied the Power Rangers format. It even had a crossover episode with Power Rangers. That's how far they'd fallen. From industry leader to trend follower. The Autopsy. What went wrong? So, what happened? How did the biggest franchise of the 90s just disappear? Here's the brutal truth. The Turtles died because the same strategy that made them successful guaranteed their failure. When you build a franchise entirely around selling toys, you create what's called narrative debt. Every time you introduce a new character just to sell an action figure, you dilute the story. Every time you avoid real stakes because the villain needs to survive for the next toy wave, you lose tension. The 1987 Turtles made billions of dollars, but they did it by sacrificing long-term creative integrity for short-term profits. And when the market shifted, when kids wanted more sophisticated stories, when competitors offered better toys, the Turtles had nothing left to fall back on. The story was hollow. The characters had no depth. The formula was exhausted. The lesson here isn't that merchandising is bad. It's that when you let the product roadmap dictate the story, you build a house of cards. It works great when the market conditions are perfect. But the second things change, the whole thing collapses. Look at what happened next. The 2003 Turtles reboot went back to the darker, more serious tone of the original Mirage comics. It had real stakes, real character development, and higher production values. Critics loved it. Fans loved it. It ran for 7 seasons. But it never reached the commercial heights of the 1987 series. Because it wasn't designed to. It was designed to tell a good story first, and sell toys second. And here's the irony. By prioritizing story over merchandise, the 2003 series actually built a more loyal, more engaged fan base. Those fans stuck around. They supported the franchise through multiple iterations. The 1987 series made more money in the short term, but the 2003 series built something that lasted. But here's the thing. Despite all its flaws, the 1987 series is still the most culturally significant version of the Turtles. When you think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you think of the 1987 version. The pizza, the catchphrases, the color-coded bandanas. That's all from the cartoon. Every reboot since then, 2003, 2012, the Michael Bay movies, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even Mutant Mayhem, they all exist in relation to the 1987 series. They either embrace it or react against it, but they can't ignore it. The 1987 cartoon proved that you could take a niche property, completely reinvent it for mass appeal, and build a multi-billion-dollar empire. But it also proved that there's a limit to how far you can push that strategy before it collapses. So here's what we learned from the rise and fall of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Success built purely on merchandising is inherently unstable. It can make you rich, it can make you famous, but it can't make you last. The 1987 Turtles made billions by turning a dark, violent comic into a bright, friendly toy commercial. That decision made them the biggest franchise of their era. But that same decision meant they had nowhere to go when the market changed. They couldn't get darker because that would alienate their core audience. They couldn't get more sophisticated because the formula didn't allow for it. They couldn't evolve because evolution wasn't part of the business model. So when Batman showed kids that cartoons could be art, when Power Rangers showed them that action could have real stakes, the Turtles were left behind. And if you think this is just ancient history, look around. This exact same pattern is playing out right now with modern franchises. How many movie universes have we seen launch with massive hype, make a ton of money on the first few films, and then collapse because they prioritized world building over storytelling? How many video game franchises have we seen turn into annual releases that print money for a few years, then crash when players get tired of the formula? The Turtles aren't unique. They're a warning. When you build something purely to exploit a market opportunity, you're building on sand. It works until it doesn't. And when it stops working, it stops fast. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are still around. They keep getting rebooted. They keep finding new audiences. And that's because underneath all the merchandising, underneath all the commercial compromise, there's actually a good idea. Four brothers who are different but united, who fight for what's right, who find family in the unlikeliest place. That core idea is strong enough to survive even the worst creative decisions. But imagine what could have been if they'd trusted that idea from the start. If they'd built the franchise on story instead of toys. If they'd thought long-term instead of quarterly earnings. Instead, we're left with a cautionary tale about the cost of selling out. And a reminder that sometimes, the thing that makes you successful is the exact same thing that destroys you. Thanks for watching, guys. But here's the thing. Everything I just told you about the Turtles, it's happening right now with modern franchises. So, if you want to see me break down another iconic 80s and 90s property that followed the exact same rise and fall pattern, click on the video that just popped up on your screen. And if you want more deep dives like this, where we actually analyze why things succeeded or failed instead of just celebrating nostalgia, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.